Folks, Christmas is just around the corner. Most of you have hopefully wished for a Behringer Wing from the Christ Child or Santa Claus. And to make the anticipation a little more enjoyable and to generally give some tips for when it arrives, that's exactly what this episode of Bastis Space Hour is for. Because today it's all about tips and tricks for the Behringer Wing. Enjoy. Yes, as previously mentioned, hopefully by Christmas, the Behringer Wing will be delivered all over Germany. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about a wing compact, a wing rack, or the full size, like the one I have here in gray or black. And the tips and tricks I'm showing today can be applied to all consoles equally. And I thought I'd put together a very quick overview. What is important for beginners who are basically coming into contact with the console for the first time? What should you know right away? Where should you pay attention right from the start so that you don't have any problems later when creating your first setup? Especially at Christmas, I would, of course, be delighted if you subscribe to my channel. There will also be a Christmas episode specifically featuring the Behringer Wing. The subscriber button is down there, bell. And never miss an episode of Bastis Space Hour. And now we are ready. Here's the first topic. Yeah, update. Most of you will probably receive the console with firmware 2.1. And I often read on social networks, on Facebook and so on, should I update my console? Is the firmware 3.5 even stable? Should I use it? I definitely give you the tip, do the update. Firmware 3.5 is definitely worth it. It runs stably and has so many amazing features on board that I wouldn't start with version 2.1 anymore. I'll show you now how to correctly update the console. The simplest way to do this is with this part here, a standard USB stick. Go to the Behringer website and search for your wing. It's really important to search for your specific wing, whether it's the compact, rack or full-size version, because the firmware differs based on the version. In my case, I have loaded the firmware 3.05 for the large version onto this stick. You can see which version is currently on your console by clicking on Setup. Click or press, and then down here on the bottom left, you'll see the firmware, in my case 2.1. And now I want to perform this update. That means I insert the stick that has the new firmware file on it. By the way, because I've read about this, there's a PDF file with every firmware that lists all the changes. However, that's not the actual firmware. It's just a supplementary document. The actual firmware is always a file that ends with the file extension .wingfw. Wingfw, that is the firmware, and currently it's version 3.0.5. Then I go to update and select this wing release 3.0.5, click on update. It asks again if I'm really sure I want to update the console. Well, I do. After a short time, it says update complete. Please shut down and reboot. I say okay. I say shut down. I say confirm. Then I turn off the console and turn it back on. And when I now look at setup, I have firmware 3.0.5 installed here. Ideally, after the firmware update, you should briefly initialize the console so that all settings are reset and adjusted to the new firmware. Just quickly go to setup for this. Initialize console, all in it, and that gives me a pristine console. Don't worry, the snapshots you have on it, or if you have already saved show files, they won't be lost through initialization. They will still be stored in the console's memory. Still, I would always save them beforehand just to be safe, or anything can happen and they might end up lost. So save, initialize, and if lost, reload them. Anyone who has already delved a bit into the topic of the Behringer Wing knows that there is a separate concept between the sources and what you should best do with them. So when you start setting up a new configuration, I definitely recommend that you click on routing, switch to sources, and then you'll have here on the left side in the source group section, you'll find all the different groups from where the channels can originate. I'm currently on local in, which are the inputs at the back of the console. Then there are also AUX inputs, and we have 8 of those. Additionally, there's AES EBU in stereo. You see here 2 channels as input. There's the oscillator, or rather 2 oscillators. Then there are these 3 AES50 interfaces, the Stage Connect interface, USB audio, W Live Play, which is the Wing Live card installed in the BIC, then module. The module is currently grayed out for me because I don't have a module installed in this console at the moment, but that would be, for example, a Dante module or a WSG module. Then there's the USB player, which is where my stick is currently inserted, and there are also user signals. User signals are signals that I can define myself based on what I want to assign to them. If you now have a band that uses, let's say, the local inputs, let's assume you have a band and want to specifically set up sources for the band. Sources are indeed the input channels in effect. Then I definitely recommend you simply start here and set here these sources first. That means if you know, for example, that my bass drum is on channel 1, then grab channel 1, give it a color, give it a symbol, give it a logo, and also give it a name. This goes pretty quickly, as you can see. Channel 2 could now be my snare. Channel 3, let's say under special pressure, might be my bass. Channel 4 is my keyboard. Or rather, I will start with the guitar here. Now I'm doing something special with channels 5 and 6. So you can see every time I press next, it automatically advances by 1. Channels 5 and 6, I want them to be my keyboard. So I've already set up some sources here. By default, I can also give them nice colors here, and I can assign symbols to them as well. So we have the snare here, the bass here, the guitar here, and now we have this keyboard. Now, what I want to do is, for example, the keyboard in my example is a stereo channel connected to 5 and 6. So I can go to settings and specify that this source should be a stereo channel. So and what happens now? You can see down here quite nicely. When I click on mono, it only shows 5 and also only 5 above. If I click on stereo, it immediately links channels 5 and 6 for me. Stereo links can always be created from odd to even channel numbers, such as from 1 to 2, from 3 to 4, from 5 to 6, and so on. You can always group them as stereo pairs, as shown quite nicely here. 5 is now left, 6 is now right, and the keyboard is in stereo. This is how it works with the sources here. I could do this for all 24, but I can just as well do it for sources from the AS50A interface. I could also do it from the USB interface for all sources coming from USB. For the sake of organization, I definitely recommend naming all the sources on the console that you intend to set up first. Once you've done that, you can now assign these sources to channels. You'll see that in my setup, local 1 to local 6 are already assigned automatically. Because I already had these 6 sources set on the channels by default, but it doesn't have to be that way. It might be that there's nothing set here. You can switch to the second tab on the homepage. There you can see which source belongs to that channel. But if I say I don't want the kick on channel 1, I'd rather have the snare there, then I can also switch. So now I have the snare on channel 1 and the snare on channel 2 as well. You see, I now have the keyboard as a source on both channel 5 and 6. This is very important to know. One channel is enough. This is now automatically a stereo channel. It's important to know that on the Wing, each individual channel strip is also a stereo channel. This means I can assign a mono source to have mono, or assign a stereo source to have stereo. I often read the question, how do I link 2 channels on the Wing? For example, as you know it from the X32, where you can link and then both channels are connected. You don't have to do that here because each channel automatically has a stereo channel integrated. I'll save channel 6 here. Go ahead and remove the source again. And now I only have source 5 and 6 in stereo on my channel 5. This is how it works. And what I've just done here with the stereo source, I could also do with the mid-side source. So if I have a mid signal and a side signal, let's say I would now, from the USB, then interface receive a mid-side signal. Let's say on channel 3, I receive a mid signal from an MS microphone, and on channel 4, I receive the side signal from the same MS microphone. I'll quickly name this name mic mid, and now I could convert this into a mid side. Now the 3 is the mid signal. You see here, I've clicked on mid side. The 3 is the mid signal. The 4 is the side signal. You can see they are now grayed out. Highlighted, this is because these two sources are not currently being used anywhere. That means these sources are set up here in the pool, in the source pool, in the source group, but are not assigned to any fader. I want to assign them, for example, to channel 6. Now, I can either go back to Home and the second tab and use the plus sign to select these sources. We were on USB. Select this source. That's option 1. Option 2 would be, I quickly remove it here again and go through the routings up here in channels, and then I can do the exact same thing. I'll unlock my channel 6 so it responds, and then I'll look for 3, 4 from the USB interface. The same thing happens. If you now look at the console's interface, you'll see that it has automatically adopted the color, symbol, and name from the individual sources. For example, if I change something here, I can adjust the name through this section. Change this name of the channel. Now it says with middle, and it has been automatically changed in the source as well. So if I now go back to routing and look at the sources, and then you see it has now changed the name here accordingly. If I don't want this and I wish to name my channels differently from my sources, I can simply go to the home screen of the channel into icon color, and there is a button at the top. The button is called Link Customization to Source. I'll remove it now and you'll see the name and color will immediately disappear automatically, and the symbol from the source on the channel, because now it allows me to name this channel myself. For example, I don't want it to be orange but yellow, and I'll give it a different symbol and call it something like MIG instead of middle as M's. So now yellow, a different symbol, MIG-MS, but as a source, it still has that USB 3.4, which still has the same color as before and the same symbol as before, because that is the source and this is the channel. And if I deactivate this button, this customization button here, then I can do it individually. If I turn it back on, it immediately has again the symbol, the color, and the label from the source. It retains that, so I can switch between them. If I want that this way, I am completely flexible. I can name the sources differently, but can still assign them to the same channel. The next thing I'm going to show you here is how to copy individual settings or entire channels between each other. I'm going to stay on my ACMA mic MS channel, and for example, because I have a second mic side microphone, I want to copy it over to channel 7, and maybe I even have a third one and want to copy it to channel 8 as well. With the Wing, this is relatively simple. I select the channel from which I want to copy, then click on copy at the top of the display. I now see that this channel I've selected is outlined in white, and I can choose different channels here. where I want to copy it to. And on the left side, I can select what I want to copy. For example, if I say, I don't want to copy the fader position, I'll make a fader position here so we can see it. And now I click on copy. Then he has copied everything for me here, except for this fader position. See, the fader wasn't copied. If I say, yes, I want to copy the fader position, then I select the channel again from which I want to copy. Click here on copy, select the channels where I want to copy to. Now I turn the fader on, copy, and now you see the fader position is copied as well. However, on channel 11, the yellow light is off. Why is that? If you look here again during copying, you'll see that I have deactivated the connection button at the top. This connection button is for thought that it also copies the assigned source for the channel. The light on the console is always off if a source is not assigned to a channel. I'll show you. Currently, local 8 is assigned to channel 8. I can also see that on the display. If I turn it off now, meaning I set it to none, then you'll see that the light is off. This essentially indicates to you immediately that the channel currently has no source assigned. If I assign any source back here again, then the light is back on. If I now want to reset such a channel or set it back to 0, I can simply click on init up here. Then I can choose what I want to reset. Just like when copying, I now select everything, including the connection, press init, and then you see the channel is reset again for pristine. Unoccupied, nothing on it, all settings deleted. I can also, for example, copy an equalizer. So if I have an equalizer here and just want to copy this equalizer to the next channel, I do it the same way. I select the channel from which I want to copy, click on copy. Now select only EQ. By the way, you do this when you are in the equalizer view. So I'm currently in the equalizer view here. Then it automatically knows that when I click on copy, I only want to copy the equalizer. As I could choose something else, but it initially selects just the equalizer settings for me. The same would apply if I were in the gate slot and click on copy. It assumes I only want to copy the gate. So I want to copy the equalizer from here. So I select copy, equalizer, and to which channel do I want to copy it? To channel 7, copy. And now you see that I have the same equalizer on channel 7, but nothing else. And if I want to copy this equalizer, not to a neighboring channel, but to a bus, that's possible too. I can simply say copy. Then, hold on, I'll quickly go into the equalizer so that it's selected. The equalizer, and now I want to copy it from input channel 6 to the bus. Copy the equalizer to bus 2. I say copy, and if you look at bus 2 now, you'll see the same equalizer has been copied over here as well. Yes, loading effects. Some might think it can't be that hard, or what's the problem? I'll just load an FX into the FX slot. Yes, you can do that. The problem with the wing isn't loading the FX. The issue is knowing that the wing doesn't have send and return channels. On the X32, for example, you have your effect sends on buses 13, 14, 15, and 16 by default. That means from these buses, you send the dry signal to the effects, and then you receive the returns from the effects on the FX return page, where the wet signal is present. With the wing, this is not the case. It's important to understand that the wing does not have send and return channels. With the wing, you simply use the inserts in the buses. It's somewhat like using a DAW and loading an insert into a bus. That means if I want a reverb effect now, then I need the following, a slot in which I load this reverb. And now it is still unused. And now I can activate the insert slot on bus 1, which is the pre-fader insert slot, and load this reverb in there. So What happens now in terms of signal flow? Every signal that you now send to this bus 1 comes from above, goes through this reverb, and can then be adjusted louder or quieter via the fader. In this case, the fader sets the output volume, essentially serving as the return of the effect. And down here, I can then decide where I want to send the signal, for example, to main 1. And now I have essentially set up an FX bus. If I want to create a delay bus, like an echo bus, I do it the same way. I go to effects and load an echo or a delay effect. And I want it now in bus 2. I would recommend loading a delay effect post fader. Why? Because I can send individual words to the delay generator by raising the fader. This means, in this case, because the fader is now before the effect, it functions as a send fader. In comparison, loaded reverb before the fader means the fader is post, essentially the return. If I load the effect, in this case, the delay into the insert slot after the fader, then the fader is pre-effect and thus becomes my send fader. That's how it works. This means I don't need to set up any sends and returns here. I simply load the effect into one of the 2 insert slots. And depending on its position, in whether it's before or after the fader, my fader now functions as a return or send fader. Important here, set the FX mix to 100 so that you truly receive the pure effect signal from this bus. Otherwise, you end up mixing the effect signal with the normal one. And then you also have a dry signal on the bus that you send out, which leads to doubling or increasing the volume of the original signal. And this is really something where many beginners often ask, hey, where do I get sends and returns from? They don't exist here. If you would like to use an external effect, it works in the same way. The only thing you change is you select here, not an internal effect, but external. I'll load it the same way here in bus 3 prefader. And here I still need to specify which outputs and inputs the signal leaves from and where it is received again. This means I now have a virtual send and a virtual return. I assign the send via routing outputs. And now I need to specify on the left side which physical output jack at the back of the console I want to send the effect out from. I want to do this over local out 1. So I select local out 1 and say it receives the signal from FX send. Which one was it? 3. FX send 3 and the local out 2 receives the signal from FX send 3 right. So I have 3 left, 3 right. I am outputting in stereo back in my bus on the effect. Can I see this here too? Yes, I can see that this external effect is being sent out to local 1 and 2. And I can assign the return where the signal comes back directly here. And for this, I can now assign a source. I can set it up normally, as I showed you before. That means local in. I'll just do that quickly. I'll just say local in 7 and 8. That's where my effect returns sources. Local in 7 and 8 stereo icon color. FX name, FX return. It's grayed out, it's not highlighted because this source is not being used yet. I'm back in the external effect. 1 and 2 are the sends, and the return now comes in on 7 and 8 as stereo. It does this automatically. I have them linked as stereo, close. And now I send the signal out via this bus 3 to 1 and 2 and expect it back on 7 and 8. Thus, I could now connect my external reverb device there, for example. Again, it's important to set the FX mix to 100. Internal, external effects, it doesn't get any simpler than this. The next question that frequently comes up is, how do I set up in-ear pods on the console? I want to manage monitor and FOH on the same mixing console. How do I realize that? How do I set it up? In essence, I would recommend using the buses for these different applications. You can see that buses 1 through 8 are always pre-configured. This is a pre-fader bus. This means everything I send there arrives regardless of the channel fader's volume. Then I still have 2 predefined group buses, 9 and 10, and the rest are post-fader buses. Use the post-fader buses best for effects. So if you want a reverb effect, as I just showed you, load it in this post-fader bus. For in-ear monitoring, it's best to use the pre-fader buses. I will quickly set up an in-ear bus or a monitor bus. This also applies to monitors. And I will show you how incredibly fast this works with the console. Bus 1, I've selected it. This will now be my in-ear Mockel. So it also gets a symbol here. Yeah, how do I get all the signals I want on the bus there as quickly as possible? Behringer has thought of something really good for this, namely this bus feed menu. So I'll click on it now. Then I see all the channels that the console has. And on the right side, I see several setting options. This is now an in-ear bus, which means I want all the signals that go into the console. So all channels here. That means I can now simply specify with a few mouse clicks what should be sent. Let's assume I have the 24 input channels here. Then I send them all to this bus. I can specify how I want to send them as a group, as post-fader or as pre-fader. In my case, in-ear bus pre-fader. I can now decide whether I want to ignore the channel mute. When is this important? For instance, if I am handling PA sound and in-ear sound from the same console, then there's often the situation where I want to mute my PA signals, meaning everything that is sent forward to the PA. However, I want to keep the in-ears on because, for example, the drummer and guitarist are still trying something together or for whatever reason. Then I can say here, I want to ignore them. I would be cautious when making a monitor mix because if you are doing monitor mixing and everything starts to feedback and you want to quickly mute the channels to stop it, and you have this, if you have ignore on or this ignore channel mute on, you can mute the channels, but it won't affect the monitors. So for monitors, I wouldn't recommend it. In my case, with in-ear, I can certainly do it. Then, important here, send panning. Send panning means I can choose whether the pen control, which I find at the bottom right of each channel, affects the in-ear mix in this case. And if so, how? I can select set to sender. Then all the channels I have now selected are sent with a single click. Send to the in-ear as a mono signal. This is recommended for mono in-ear setups. Then there's set to channel pan. Set to channel pan means that the channel pan is adopted once. For instance, the pan set for the PA, and with link to channel pan, it is permanently adopted. This means any changes in the channels panorama affect the in-ear. In my case, I'm simply selecting link to channel pan. Send, enable, on or off. That's quite clear. I want to send them all. So I set this to on at once. And now I can even choose whether I want to send them by default at 0 decibels, minus 10 decibels, or off, which means minus infinity decibels. For our example, I'll just set it to minus 10 decibels by default. I say apply, and now all channels, I can see that down here in the sense, in Sheen, all 24 channels that I just selected are now being sent at minus 10 decibels pre-fader, and specifically from the tap point to this bus. So now I've basically configured the first in-ear channel, and in my case, that's the in-ear vocal, meaning the singer would already hear something, since I'm currently sending all signals at minus 10 decibels. Well, not quite yet. I still need to adjust the channel a bit, turn it on and route it somewhere out of the mixer at the back. How do I route it out of the mixer to the in-ear? For this, simply go back to your routing outputs, select the appropriate output where the channel should be sent. You can see it here with me already. I'm sending it now to local out 1, and I take the left channel here. If I want to send it in stereo, then I would now need to send the corresponding stereo partner to local out 2. But usually you only have mono in ear. That means I send to the next one, bus 2. If you only send to the left, then it's, well, if you send only to the left on bus 1, it's mono. You can also send only to the right. It makes no difference. In mono, both channels are the same. Similarly, I could now set up an effect channel. I'll do it quickly. I'm using bus 11 here because I have already loaded a reverb into bus 11. And when I go back to this menu here, I also have this bus 11 feed configuration menu. And here too, I can now select channels that should be sent to bus 11. I can also specify how they should be sent. This is an effect channel, so it's set to post. Here, I do not want to ignore the channel mute. Sen, panning, in my case, link to channel pan. I want them all to be on, and I want them all sent in at 0 decibels for an effect. Apply. And when I now look at the individual channels here in the send configuration, particularly the ones I just selected, those weren't all of them. But the ones I selected, you see, they are sent to bus 11 at 0 dB. This way, I can quickly configure all the channels here. You can see now, I've sent them with post fader. There are still 2 groups here, which don't have a fader. And here on the left, I'm currently sending with tap point. You can set the tap point where it picks up here at the top. Yeah. Here, you can see the complete channel chain from input to output. And the tap point essentially determines at which point in this chain the signals for the monitor mix or for the bus are tapped. I can even set it to tap before the equalizer here. And I can set the separate equalizer just for the tap point. This is quite important, for instance, when you're mixing monitors. Because if you sometimes put the PA signal on the monitors, like from microphones, they might start to feedback. In that case, I would recommend that you take here, takes the tap point after the equalizer, but you can simply pull back a bit on the highs in the tape equalizer here. I'm going to exaggerate now, and that would mean having less treble on the monitors than on the PA. This way, they might not feedback. In that case, you have to try it out. Some might find it too dull. As mentioned, the tap point determines where in the chain the signal is tapped. At the very end, after the fader, it's always post. Next tip, user. I find 2 user layers here at the bottom. As a beginner, I'd say they don't necessarily need to concern you. You have the individual channels laid out here from 1 to 12, 13 to 24, and so on. Still very interesting for someone who says, I want a few channels that I have to access repeatedly to be always on the same interface. If I want to assign them, I select the respective user 1 or user 2, click on view, and then through config, I can assign these 12 channels or these 8, or over here, these 4 with whatever I want. I can, for example, place channels on them. Channel 1, channel 3, and so on. I can place buses or mains next to it. For example, this in-ear that I just set up. I could also place this effects bus. The one I just had here, I believe that was effect 11, right? Bus 11, I could place it here. I can pull down DCA groups. And now, here come the really cool features. I can also pull down bus sends here. So there are many different possibilities. I'm not going through them all in detail now because it's too much. There are also options for bus-to-bus sends. Here, there are individual settings for FX. For example, this is interesting. If I now say, here the reverb size from FX1, or let's say the pre-delay of the reverb. Then I can place that on the fader. Then I always have it right here. You see? I can always change the pre-delay of the effect here, no problem, and so on and so forth. There are countless possibilities here. I think this is worth its own episode of Bastis Mixing Hour. Yes, and because the console offers so many options to adjust things, it might also be sensible during live operation. If not, everyone can do it, but only the operator or the audio engineer responsible for the console. And that's why I'm going to show you the simple trick to lock the console. Basically, it's quite simple. Just hold the home button for 2 seconds and the console is locked. If I hold the home button again for 2 seconds, the console is unlocked. Since eventually everyone might figure this out, I can always hold a second button as well. That means home and setup, for example, for 2 seconds, then the console is locked with home and setup. I can now press different buttons here and nothing will happen unless I again hold home and setup for 3 seconds. What's a bit annoying now is, well, I just told you, home and a second button. If someone knows that it works with this button combination and knows they have to hold home and the second button, it would be pretty easy to guess which the second button was that I used, namely, in this case, setup, because it lights up. Thus way, here's the tip. Do it the other way around. Hold the second button first and then home. Then home lights up, but it can't be determined which the second button was that was pressed. You would really have to try all the buttons. In my case now, the routing, yes guys, those were my wing tips for beginners or perhaps also for advanced users. Maybe there was something that someone didn't know yet. Write in the comments below if you liked it. And as announced, there will be another really awesome episode around Christmas. We'll be mixing a song together then. Until then, I wish you all the best. Have fun with your wings, regs, compacts, or whatever you have. Take care, your Basti. Bye.